Hello pilots, this is a video on how to install our sewing jig for Bernina sewing machines. So when you first get your sewing jig in the mail, should have already grinded your outside legs of your feed dogs smooth so the teeth aren't visible above the stitch plate, and then you want to maintain the teeth on the center feed dog. So once that's complete, step 2 is to buy a seam guide so that you can have a bolt to secure your sewing jig to your sewing machine's arm. The holes on our sewing jigs will be installed on those that have Bernina sewing machines because the whole alignment in relationship to the feed dogs is the same for all the Bernina machines, even the older vintage Bernina machines, and then the newer 300, 400, 500, 600, 700, and 800 series will all be the same thread pattern, which is M4 by 0.7 pitch. And you can get those at the hardware store, or what I did was just buy one of these seam guides. That way I had one, and then I purchased another screw from the hardware store. So once these have been grinded and you've got the screws to attach and secure your sewing jig, you want to take the bobbin thread and feed it through the back of the sewing jig, like yay, coming up through the center gap between the two movable pieces. And then with that, you'll go ahead and slide her in, and you can slide it in on either this side or this side, meaning in relationship to getting it in perfect alignment. The presser foot. And once you slide it in, get into place, you align your holes on your sewing jig with the holes in the sewing machine arm. And then I'll go ahead and secure it down. So got one in, get the other one in, and I've always put masking tape on alignment marks because I have allowed some side-to-side movement, a little shimmy in there on purpose. That's why I put, once I find my exact center mark that I want these in the center position with a little bit of a gap in relation to the center position needle, I'll go ahead and put my tape on. So I'll line it up with the tape because I know that's exactly where I want it. I'll secure them down. I just put these on hand tight and just I mean, you can get one of these little Milwaukee things to secure it a little tighter. I mean, just ever so. A little bit tighter. There you go. Okay, once she's in place, you want to go ahead and open up the two movable pieces wider than what the line that you're going to end up sewing. So if the etch arrows are on the ends here by the knobs, when the etch arrow is pointing this direct way and the other etch arrow is pointing that way, and that's the way you turn them to open up these two pieces. So moving them simultaneously in unison together, I'll make it wider than I need, and then I'll go ahead and get my line, and always tape the very end of my line, and that way it keeps the lines together tight at the very beginning, and that way the feed dog in the center will likely grab it better than it would otherwise. I'll slide this in through the underneath. Of course, as you know from my previous videos, you can go over the top or underneath. I prefer going underneath myself. And I'll get it on the center line, and then I'll go ahead and drop my presser foot, and then I'll use the hand wheel and bring the needle down, which is in the center position, and I'll make sure that my line, the center of my two lines, is right on the center. So the needle is right between the two lines, and that way I know my lines are where I want them. And then I'll go ahead and close these up against the line, and I'll turn that the opposite direction of the etched arrows to snug it up. And let's say my needle, let's say these lines are just a hair that direction, and I need to move them both this way. And so if you close this side and open this side, so you're going to turn these actually the same direction, it'll move it this way. And if you go the opposite, so the opposite of the arrow, that direction, and with the arrow in that direction, it'll move them this way. And you'll get used to it after a while. It's a little bit of a learning curve. So again, if you want to move both the movable pieces this way in unison or that way in unison, you're going to use the opposite arrow direction here and the arrow direction this way, so they're both going to be turned this direction. So if I turn them both towards me, it's going to move them both together this way. And if I turn them both the opposite direction, this is opposite from the arrow and this is with the arrow, they'll both move this way. And so that's something you'll get used to after a while, and it'll be second nature. And so in this case, I need to move them a tad that direction. So I always know it's the opposite of the arrow, and then I'll move the other one the same way. And I'll just do that together, and I know I'm right on the money. There we go. Okay, so now I'll lift up the presser foot, and I'll make sure I can still move the lines forward and back, these two are not too snug up against it, but they won't move side to side. So this is good. It won't go back and forth, but it will go forward and back, and that's the way I want it. And then I'll move this line way past what I want it, so I got these all pushed in between the two pieces. And then I'll bring it back to where I want it, and my end loop is right at this little, see this little mold in transition point from here to here? Well, if I have the tip of the loop at this point, I know my loop is going to be the right size, which is, I use 30 millimeters. So right there is where I want it, and then I'll drop her down. And so now I'll go ahead and judge my needle width, my zigzag that is, and I always bring my presser foot up and I'll adjust it, and this line is 1.4. So we'll get that set up, 1.4 millimeters. Okay, and then my stitch length on this machine is 0.95, but on yours maybe a little bit different. And my upper tension on this machine is 4.5 for this particular line, and then my foot pressure, which you may or may not have with your machine, but on this one I have it at 20, and then I'll reverse stitch. So I got that set. I'll put my foot down, and I've already sighted, the needle's already in position, and I'll make sure it bisects the line on the side it is, and it's, ooh, it looks like it's a little too far over, so I want to take both of these and move it this direction. And so that means I'm going to move, look at the arrow opposite here, it's going to push it that way. So I'll move them both of these towards me a hair. And now we're about right. Let's go a little bit more. Right there. Okay, now we'll pop her up. And the way I double check is I move the line aside. And then I'll run my needle down with the hand wheel. And I'll go down, make sure I miss the sewing jig with the needle. And then as it comes up, it'll side shift to the other side. And then I'll take a little tool here and run the line out, because there's a little twist in it now after I ran the needle down. And I'll put my line back in place, drop the fresher push, and now I'm going to go ahead and drop the needle again to make sure it bisects the knot on the other side, which it does. But I still need to go a hair that direction. So I'm going to bring it a hair that direction. There, now we're good. I say we're ready to sew. And so we'll go ahead and bring the needle in halfway down, and I'll go ahead and begin to sew in the reverse position. So we do our back stitch. So I'll hold the tails on this side just ever so gently, and we'll go and begin sewing. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. And that's what I use for my 1 centimeter. Now we put the tails on the other side of the block when we go in the forward direction, so I'll change it to forward. And then what I do is I actually grab the loop on the back and then give it a little bit of tension. You don't want to pull it, but you don't want to pull it through. You want to just give it a little bit of tension. In this case, I went a little too far and I can't even grab the loop. It's right underneath the feed dog, so, and presser foot. So we're going to trust that it's going to grab it. We'll go forward now. 1, 2, and it's grabbed it. It's going good, so I didn't even need to grab it. That's just an extra precaution. Now we're in the home stretch. Let go of the tails. You could actually speed it up at this time too, but I'll just keep it at this speed. And so you can see how this thing works. Presser should be going up and down to just a hair. Not putting too much pressure on the line, but enough to move it. And then once I get the very tip of the line at the front part of this presser foot, I'll count a certain amount so I know I don't go beyond it. So right there is, I'm going to start counting. In my case, it's 7. And yours may be a little bit different because sometimes these are just slightly different, even though we all have the same Bernina machines. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I'm going to do 6. Looks like I'm right at it. Okay. Now I'm going to reverse. Now I'll grab the line here and I'll give a little bit of tension because it's this little end line will actually hit up against the presser foot and may resist and stop it. So if you get a little bit of tension, it'll get past that point. But you don't want to pull the line, just a slight little bit of tension on it. So it's loose, a little bit of tension. So now I'm going to go reverse. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. We're done. Lift the needle, presser foot. I'll take a look at it now. I'll pull it back through the tunnel. Okay. So if we take a look at the line here, so what we did is we started at this point, we did a reverse stitch for 1 centimeter, and then we went 10 centimeters down, and then once we hit the end, we went back up 1 centimeter, and that's how we do our lines. So you can see here, this line is a very small line. This is the zigzag width is 1.4 millimeters on this one. Of course, we have even smaller lines, and this thing will do just fine on all of them. But that gives you an example of how to set up your Bernina machine for the scenario and get her working right. If you got any questions, please feel free to contact us at any time.